little. Hey guys, I wanted to share a brief little video with you, just diving into how to think critically in these times. There's so much information coming at us in every moment. We're in the age of information, and beyond. And the real key is, how do we sort through it all? How do we cut through the noise and get to what's actually important for us, for our families, for our communities, for the world, right? How do we know what's useful, what's important, what's true, what's valid, what's valuable, and how can we make sense of it all and actually utilize it in our lives and utilize it for our work, so that we can make a dent in the world, so we can make a dent in the universe, right? And the best system that I've ever found to sort through this is called the classical education model, and it's a great framework to think about how to do this kind of thing. And in the classical education model, it came from Greece, and then eventually was adopted by the Christians in like the medieval times, up until about 100 years ago or so. It was a dominant model for education in the world. Not that most of the world was educated, but those who were educated in the Western world often had a classical education, like our founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and things like that, had this kind of classical education. The base of the classical model is called grammar, and it's kind of like grammar school, right? Like, you go to like the first couple of years of school, you're picking up concepts about how the world works, you're learning stories, you're learning terminology, right? You're learning how to relate to different things in the world. It's like, if you go to a foreign country and you don't speak the language, you can't do much. I mean, you can have experiences, but you're constantly running into this kind of barrier socially, because you don't know how to speak their language. You're trying to hope, you're hoping that they'll pick up your language, or that they already know it if you're speaking English or something. But it's kind of hard to get around if you don't know the terms, right? So if you've ever picked up like a heavy duty science book or math book, and you're reading through, they've got all these incredibly precise terms, and like, how do you know what any of that means unless you have already learned what each of those terms is, right? So the first phase of the classical education model is that you learn a grammar, you learn a deep grammar of the world. And the way that they would do this traditionally in the classical education model is you'd study Latin and you'd study Greek, and then you would actually read the original texts of a lot of these Western thoughts, these Western writings from Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, etc., right? And as you read these different things, you'd be reading the original versions. You'd read where these concepts come from, that even though they're thousands of years old, they've had these huge ramifications through time on our society and on our culture today, and they still are deeply embedded in what we do every day, right? And so the one of the things about the classical education model is it's really what it is a liberal education. And it's one of the best descriptions that I've ever heard of that is from St. Augustine, and he said that with a liberal education, or a classical education, liberal meaning like to free one's mind, to have the freedom to think, right? But St. Augustine said, with a liberal education, classical education, I have the ability to understand anything that I read, and I have the ability to express and articulate anything that I think, right? So powerful, so prescient. And so once you acquire that first skill of grammar, which, by the way, all three of the skills I'm talking about, we have an opportunity to work on, right? You can always read books and study and go to seminars and get coaching and mentorship on these, on these things, to actually learn constantly about a great example is from Jim Rohn, one of the mentors of Tony Robbins. And Jim said, whenever you have some area in your life that you're interested in making progress in, make a study of it, right? Find out more, get the information, as he would say, right? Get the information that you need in order to actually learn what you don't know, right? So learn the terms, learn the concepts, learn the stories, learn how to relate to that world, right? That's the first phase. And so historically, that would have been done in the first couple of years of your education. Nowadays, if you're an adult and you're picking this stuff up, just pick up some books, go to a seminar, make a specific study of a world that you want to get into. I just did this for myself this last week at a financial event, Platt Financial, and I was picking up for 7 days straight just all of this different, the grammar of financial world and the economics and all of that. So the second part that's absolutely critical, if you want to master your mind, if you want to have this liberal, free mind that you can think whatever you want and do whatever you want and create whatever you want in the world and make a dent in the universe, the second most important thing in the model is called logic. And what logic really is once you have a grammar down, once you have a set of concepts that you understand about how the world works, right? You need to be able to form an argument. You need to be able to form a constructive argument in the world. And we all do. The thing is, we all make arguments, just most of our arguments tend to be invalid. They tend to not be true. And we don't even realize it, right? We hear things from news outlets. We hear things from other people. And we take in that information as fact when it's actually just opinion. And so the real question when you interact with someone, when you read something, when you think about something and you want to come up with a new belief about how the world operates, right? Think about whatever someone says or whatever you say as like the tabletop on a table. And underneath that tabletop, there's legs, right? And so there needs to be legs underneath any belief that you hold. Otherwise, it's not true. And the same thing for anybody else. Anything you ever hear, anything you ever interact with. So logic is a way to cut through all that stuff and get clear on what's actually true, what actually is valid and logical. And there's all these terms like, the argument and the premises and things like that. But that's all. There's all this theory and BS about logic. But one of the most important tools, if you want to get smart on that, the way to do that is look up. There's these two things called logical fallacies and cognitive biases. So logical fallacies are ways to detect and determine if what someone says or if what you say is not true, is not valid, and thus you can completely discount it. You can strip the emotion out of the situation. You can completely discount it and ignore it and realize it's just an opinion, and it's just someone's personal opinion. It doesn't have any bearing on any situation. It's like, oh, that's cool. That's what that person believes. That's fine. It doesn't, but it doesn't affect you. It doesn't go into your mindset and what you think and what you believe about the world. And so what a logical fallacy is, like a good example is, the easiest example in the world is in politics. Most politicians use ad hominem as when they compete with each other in debates and things like that. And so ad hominem is against the man, which means they're making a personal slander, saying, oh, this person's just dumb, this person doesn't know anything, they don't have any experience, this is just a bad person, they don't, whatever. You're just attacking the person. That means that, like, if it's sort of like this person's policy on, I don't know, immigration is bad or is a bad idea because they're dumb and they don't know any better. Like, that's not a valid argument. That's not true. And it's not true because regardless of whether that person is dumb, even if that was true, like, you're attacking the person and not the fact. You're not attacking the specific fact that the person's position was holding. So therefore, you're not actually attacking their specific argument, and therefore your argument is false. And so learning logical biases or learning logical fallacies helps you get that clarity. And the more you study it, the more it just becomes part of how you think. I never thought about this years ago until I was in a situation where I got a computer science degree and I was in the software field for 12 years. And my last year in the field, I was working in a pretty high level role, and I had the vice president of operations in my company kind of mentoring me through this role. And at one point, I was like working all these hours and putting all this time in, and but the results just weren't coming. They just weren't happening yet. We were still figuring everything out. And my mentor, he's the VP. He says, Brian, like, I can feel your heart. I can feel your passion. You really care about this, and you're really doing a great job, but you're just not thinking clearly. And I was like, what do you mean I'm not thinking clearly? Like, I'm a software engineer. Like, I'm a systems person. This is how I operate. And I realized that what he meant was, like, this kind of stuff about fallacies. I didn't have a sharp mind. I thought I did because I thought about a lot of technical stuff, but I wasn't able to slice through to actually get to what's true, and therefore operate on that instead of operating on ideas and fallacious thinking. So just studying the fallacies is a good way to start with that. A second part is cognitive biases, which is similar to fallacies. It's just the way that the human brain naturally operates. And if you don't know about the biases, then you are subject to, errors in your thinking as well. And so with biases, like a good example of a bias is anchoring. So if you're ever in a room with a group of people, the person who is in the leadership role or is deemed the leader of the room, when they have an opinion on something, everyone else in the room tends to follow that person's opinion. And whether or not it's true, whether or not it has any bearing on reality, it doesn't matter. People will follow that opinion. It's called anchoring, right? People do the same thing in investing in the stocks, and they'll anchor on the 52-week high, or they'll anchor on the last high or something like that, just because of the fact that this is the highest it's been in the last 52 weeks in the last year, therefore that's the highest it can ever go. It's like, how do you know that's true? Just because that's the highest it's ever been, maybe there's a reason that it's that high. Maybe there's actually value production happening in that company underneath what's happening, and because of that, the stock might actually go to a higher price, right? So that's anchoring. Another example of a cognitive bias is recency. Which means and it's actually kind of funny, like recency and primacy. So recency bias means you tend to remember the most recent thing that you learned. So regardless of what you previously have learned about a situation, a subject, a person, you tend to focus on, not just remember, but you tend to focus on that. And so if you don't know about these biases, they're automatic. Biases happen in the brain, and so you need to actually have a strategy to first be aware of it, and then second, to actually overcome it or mitigate that effect. So like, what's a way to mitigate the bias of recency is to collect more data than just your last experience. Like, the last time I was with it, every time I was with that, like your argument, like let's break this down a little bit. Every time I'm with this person, they always piss me off. Really? Okay, well, how many times have you been with this person that they've pissed you off? Well, I was just with them the other day and they pissed me off. Okay, what about the previous time? Well, no, it didn't really happen then. What about the previous time, like a week before that? No, it didn't really happen then. So what you're saying is 1 out of 3 times so far in the last couple of weeks, they pissed you off. You're not actually, your argument that of every time is not true, right? The premise is bullshit. So knowing about it, you can collect more data, right? I expanded the frame, I expanded the question to be including a larger set of data to get away from primacy. And the same thing for anchoring. With anchoring, instead of just like accepting the person's position as the truth, which is also a logical fallacy at the same time of authority, the authority fallacy. And so whoever tends to have an authority, to be an authority, people put things up to a higher authority, like because God said so, because my boss said so, because the governor said so, or the president said so, it must be true. You can't just have that. It may or may not be true, but the reason that it's true or not true has nothing to do with the fact that some authority said it. It's not logically true. It doesn't make sense within the facts. So just becoming aware of logical fallacies and cognitive biases, and then working to counteract them consciously. The more you do that, you're putting some steam through your head, but you're training your mind to think more in a clear, razor sharp fashion. And when you have that, the biggest takeaway that I had from working with that mentor was, by building that sense of clarity of thinking, I actually could experience something and not get emotional about it. So previously, I would maybe react to a situation, and because I thought something was true because someone said so. But once I could clear out all the riffraff, I could just take in things separately and be like, well, that's just something that someone says, it's an opinion. This is actually true because it's proven by X, Y, and Z underneath that. And as soon as I start seeing all the legs, then you actually see what's a solid structure and what's not. You tend to your thinking tends to get focused on the stuff that's actually true, and the rest just gets automatically deleted and discarded. And you don't get emotional, and you're like, this is just what the reality is, this is what truth is. And therefore you can make new sound judgments in your reasoning from there. And so you don't get caught in traps like conspiracy thinking and groupthink, and just because somebody else said it, you get to be an independent free thinker, a liberal, and have a liberal mind. And like St. Augustine said, that you can have the capability, the capacity to understand anything that you read and and articulate anything that you think. So that's logic. And the final skill, so far we've got grammar, concepts of the world, logic, your ability to clearly think and slice through what you're interacting with in the information, and be able to actually grasp it and grok it, and make a reasoned argument that based on truth, and then interpret other people's arguments as true or not true, and be able to take it in effectively. The third skill of the classical education or liberal mind is the skill of rhetoric. And so rhetoric is the ability to articulate or express your argument. So you can see how this kind of stacks, right? The first skill is the base, that's the foundation. You need to have a grammar or the concepts of what you've got in the world. Otherwise, you have nothing to talk about. Like, you've got no way to do anything, right? So you need a solid grammar. And the more solid grammar that you have, the more stories that you collect, the more original concepts that you've gotten and you've got a deep understanding of, the better. On top of that, you have logic. And with logic, you can formulate those individual bits of grammar, those concepts, those stories into arguments and become a reasoned thinker. And then you can express and debate, and you can listen to other people's ideas and take them in effectively. And the final thing is, how can I express, right? Now that I've got an argument to express, how can I express that effectively? And, one of the best things I've ever heard, there was a famous orator or speaker back in Roman times, and I forgot his name at the moment, but he was famous for doing these grand speeches in Rome in the Senate, and just wooing everybody, convincing everybody of his argument. And what he would do is actually almost, I think it's kind of funny, almost the opposite of logic. Like, once he had a logical foundation for his argument underneath what he was saying, he would almost become illogical in his presentation style. He would use emotion, because the whole point of speaking is to bring out emotion from your audience, right? To actually bring that into their experience. And so the ability to articulate, to utilize your body, your language, your speech, your words effectively to convey the meaning that you have. And you can see once again how this stacks, right? The clearer the concepts, the broader, the deeper the concepts, the clearer your thinking and your reasoning, the sharper that it's like trying to make energy from, or trying to do something in the world with a piece of carbon versus a diamond, right? A diamond is much more valuable than a piece of carbon because of that pressure. It's been refined, right? And the same thing when you get to rhetoric, when it stacks, because you've got this clear, sharp thing that you want to express, and now you get to express it so beautifully and using emotion and conveying people with this point, convincing them with your words, with your articulation, with your thought, with your body language, etc. So this is called a classical model, and some schools still use this, and I think it's pretty solid. It's pretty special in the world, and so ways to learn that. I mean, learn about communications, learn about the skill of how to communicate effectively. Learn about, there's some original texts and stuff like that from Aristotle as well on rhetoric that you could read. But you could also just study great speakers in the world. I think like a person like Tony Robbins or a guy named Eli Wild. Both of them are incredible speakers. There's some fantastic, orators and speakers in the world, and just watch how they speak. How do they, work with an audience? How do they interact with them? What do they do? How do they shift their focus, their body language, their words, right? How do they work with all of that to successfully communicate with the audience? So I hope this is useful to you. I think Like I said before, in this modern day, there's so much information out there. How do you know how to slice through it? And how do you know what's important and relevant for you? And how do you know when you have something that you want to express? How do you know how to effectively how to effectively express it so that other people get it, they grok it, and then they can do something with it, and then you can therefore make that dent in the universe. So, peace.